I do.
Is it Tom next?
Mr. Moose, could you state your name, please, and spell your last name for the record?
Michael S. Marous, M-A-R-O-U-S.
Mr. Moose, you have there, for the record, in energy exhibits 54, 55, and 56. 54 is your CV, correct?
Yes.
55 is your pre-filed direct testimony?
Correct.
And 56 is your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or corrections to any of those documents?
Only that my Rhode Island General Certified Appraiser license has been extended until November of 2018.
And for the record, that is on the pre-filed direct, exhibit 55, at lines 18 to 19.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And if you could make... I believe on line 19, then you'd be changing 2017 to 2018, is that correct? No other changes or corrections?
No.
With that, we'll turn to the witness. Madam Chair.
Staff has no questions for this witness.
OER has no questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a few questions. Morning, Mr. Marous. My name is Michael Boreum. I'm the attorney for the town of Borough.
Good morning, Council.
I have a few general questions for you, and then after I'm done these questions, I will then start moving through your testimony, kind of page by page for a while. But to begin with, am I correct that your most up-to-date market analysis is the one dated August 29th, 2016?
Correct.
And the report reflects your understanding of the Clear River Energy Center?
Correct.
The report also expresses your opinions with regard to the impact of the Clear River Energy Center on property values in Borough, correct?
It does.
Now, on page 2, you've stated that the proposed power plant will not have a negative impact on the property values, in your opinion, correct?
Correct.
And this is based on the information set forth in that August 29th, 2016 report, correct?
Yes.
Is it based on anything else? Professional judgment, that sort of thing?
It's based on my 40-plus years of experience, my continual updating of these value impacts, including looking at additional sales information in the Burrville market. It's also looking at the opening of another similar power plant in Lackawanna, Pennsylvania, which I visited, and also looking at matched pairs and value trends there. It's also looking at value trends in the Rhode Island, Burrville area from the time that I did this report up to the current day.
All right, so would you agree with me that appraisal is both an art and a science?
I agree.
And professional judgment plays a role, correct?
It does.
Now, on page 8 of your report, you discuss the proposed project. And in the last paragraph, you state that the majority of truck traffic will be generated by transporting diesel fuel if needed during peak demand when winter conditions require natural gas to be diverted to home heating uses. Did I read that correctly?
You did.
So in your opinion, the majority of the trucks that will be on the Bardwell roads during the operation of the facility will be carrying diesel fuel?
It depends on the situation. Clearly, there will also be trucks carrying water to the plant besides diesel.
Now, your report was dated, again, in 2016. You're aware that there was an updated water plan that was filed after that report?
Generally, yes, but I'm not the water expert or the construction expert.
So you didn't make any attempt to update your 2016 report with the information from the revised water plan?
I was aware of it, but it didn't impact my conclusions, so I didn't impact my report for that updated water plan.
Correct. Have you reviewed the traffic impact study that was dated May 2016?
I've reviewed multiple traffic reports in regard to the proposed development. I believe there are actually 2 traffic consultants that have prepared opinions and reports, so I am aware of them. I am not a traffic engineer, though.
I understand. But did you look at the May 2016 traffic study?
I did.
Okay. And the cover page is up on the screen if you'd like to familiarize yourself. So you're somewhat familiar with the anticipated vehicle traffic both into and out of the site?
I am.
Now, one of the things you stated, and I think it's on pages 8 and 9 of your report, is that there'll be a larger volume of traffic during construction. That after construction, the traffic would be limited to about 25 workers and delivery trucks. Is that right? Feel free to look at page 8 and 9 of your testimony if you'd like.
Correct.
Could you tell me how much vehicle traffic do you anticipate will be added to the area during the construction period?
That's actually outlined in detail in the traffic reports, which I have not memorized, but clearly it will be based on what is being constructed. It will be significantly more than during the operational phase.
All right. So let's take a look at that. Could you bring up page 18 of that report, please?
This is not familiar with.
Are you asking me to do that?
No, there's a tech person in the back who's doing this for us and doing a wonderful job. So there we go. And what I'm looking at, again, if you could go down more to the middle, table 3, thank you. Perfect. And if you'd like to take a little bit of time to familiarize yourself with this, we can do that. But I'm going to ask you a few questions about table 3, the construction build trip generation summary. Okay?
I have reviewed that. I'm ready to answer questions as an appraiser, not as a traffic consultant.
Completely understood. But you did rely on this, correct?
Why, I consider it, yes.
Okay. So as I'm reading this table 3, and this is during the construction period, it looks to me like it's divided up between morning and afternoon, and it looks at peak hours in the morning and peak hours in the afternoon. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And so I'm looking first in the morning, and it says in the 3rd line down under description, total trips FNTP. Actually don't recall what that stands for, but I don't think it's important, during the construction phase. And the total in the morning during the peak hour is 437 trips, correct?
Correct.
And then we look at the afternoon, and again during the peak hour in the afternoon, the total trips during the construction phase will be 458, correct?
With an emphasis on the out, that's correct,
So in the morning, most of them are going in, and in the afternoon, most of them are coming out.
which is typical, yes.
If I added those two together, 437 and 458, I would get just under 900 trips per day during the construction period, correct?
Agreed.
And is it your understanding that these additional 900 or so vehicle trips that will be going into the site will last somewhere between 2 to 4 years, depending on the construction period?
Not necessarily. This is a peak, my understanding, and obviously based on what's being constructed and what phase they are, that many times it's going to be less. And my understanding that peak period is far less than your upper end of the range you just stated.
Okay. But during the peak periods of a construction period that will last about 2 to 4 years, the number would be about 900 during the peak.
Again, I wouldn't agree with that. I would agree that that's probably more realistic for the lower end of that range, just based on typical construction cycles. Also looking at the Lackawanna plant, which is a third bigger, and going based on the information and the development of that plant.
But the traffic study that we're looking at is saying during peak periods during the construction, we're looking at just under 900 a day.
Right, but that doesn't say for 4 years. That's the only issue that I'm not agreeing with you.
But during the peak periods of the 4 years, those are the numbers.
Correct.
You're aware that the proposed facility is about a 1,000 megawatt facility?
I have.
And have you taken a look at all at the Ocean State Power facility that's in Bergen?
I've actually looked at it on 3 separate occasions.
And you're aware that it's about half the size, about 560 megawatts?
That's correct, but I believe that's the current capacity, but my understanding there's potential for expansion of that facility, but under the existing conditions, yes.
Now, you developed what's known as a matched pair analysis to do your analysis, correct?
That was part of my analysis, yes.
Did any of the transactions that you were dealing with experience traffic levels similar to those that we've seen in this report during the peak periods?
That's a very good question. The Ocean State Power Plant was developed, I believe, in about 91. And it's smaller, but obviously during construction, it would have had some significant traffic. But the reality is I was using comparable data far more current than that. So during the time period, my comparable data, none of them had the temporary construction traffic that's projected for this development.
Okay. And I'm assuming you agree that to the extent there is a disruption to the community, that disruption is going to be a lot greater during the construction period than it will be during the permanent operations.
I would agree with that as typical of any major construction project.
So, am I correct that you are concluding that there will not even be a temporary impact on construction, on property values during the construction period? Despite the 900 or so at peak, 900 or so vehicles at peak?
That's a very interesting question, Council. And when you say temporary, I'm really kind of looking at that entire, probably the period that's the peak, which is the 1.5 to 2 years. And in my opinion, because it's a known quantity, which is typical of most major construction projects, there will not be a diminution in value. Will there be inconvenience and aggravation and frustration? Clearly, which again is typical of most construction project, but since there is a known beginning and a known end, once there's approval based on the benefits and based on the trends of values in the subject area, it's my opinion it will not be. And again, I'm assuming obviously state-of-the-art construction and traffic management and all the other controls that will be in place.
So you're aware that a number of the trucks that will be coming in and out of the facility are going to be very large trucks?
Correct.
Now, just assume I'm living on the truck to the plant, and I live in Barville, and I want to sell my home. And I list my home for sale during the period of time of, say, the peak year, year and a half of construction. And the trucks and the cars are constantly passing back and forth in front of my house. Is it going to make it more difficult for me to sell that house?
On a singular basis, yes, but the market participant or buyer is going to look at all the impacts, including jobs, including the significant contribution to the community and the infrastructure, and the long-term benefits it's going to provide, including to the school systems, and weigh those issues when making the decisions. And in my opinion, it's not going to have a negative impact. Will some buyers be negatively impacted? Yes. Will some buyers be positively impacted? Yes. So it's not, every person's not going to have the same opinion as we sit in this room, but to sell a house, you only need technically one buyer, and clearly if you have two or three, then you have a stronger market. So will some people have a negative view? Yes, but we'll all know.
Now, on page 9 of your report, you state in the first full paragraph that water for the operation will be provided exclusively from a contaminated Patapsco Utility District well that was declared undrinkable approximately 10 years ago. Is that correct?
That's what I say.
And you also go on to state on page 10 that, quote, the project will clean up and possibly will completely remediate the Patapsco Utility District's well as part of the planned water treatment operations, correct?
It says that my understanding that there may have been some changes or modifications, but when doing further inquiry, that doesn't impact my conclusions. It's probably more technical with engineering, but not for value.
So you have not revised your report to take into account the fact that the well is no longer being used or remediated?
That's correct.
You didn't think it was important to your conclusions to revise them?
Anything could be important, but my understanding is the project was able to procure water, and based on my analysis, I didn't see where that was a direct impact on value.
Well, the method that they decided to use to procure water is to truck it in, correct?
Correct.
And you don't think that having a number of trucks on a daily basis for the entire life of the plant would have a negative impact of those properties that live along the truck route?
Another interesting question, that's like saying the explosion of e-commerce and FedEx, UPS trucks providing Amazon or other retailer goods into the residential market is going to have a negative impact on value. Trucking is just the reality of the current market conditions, and for a state route, the volume of those trucks is obviously significantly less than our personal trucks that are coming into our neighborhoods all the time.
So that's but you haven't done an analysis of that, have you?
Well, I looked at the number, I took into consideration, that each truck contains approximately 8,000 gallons of water, and looked at that consumption, but again, we're talking a state-of-the-art facility that's very efficient with their water consumption, and I didn't see where there was any excess truck traffic that would have an impact on value. But also, council, I was looking at, as entitled, what could be developed on this 67 to 68 acre parcel, or what could be developed on the whole spectrum development, which could have many uses that would have significantly more truck traffic than planned for the proposed development.
So what is the amount of truck traffic per day that you assumed when you reached your conclusion in your August 29, 2016 report?
I didn't have a hard number. And again, whether one unit is going to be built or two units, at 8,000 gallons per day. I don't recall the math, but it could be 6 to 10 trucks generally in and out on a water basis, but I would again defer to the traffic engineers to give you a more specific answer.
So you didn't think that the exact amount of trucks that were going to be running water, fuel oil, ammonia, hydrogen, etc. into the plant really made a lot of difference?
No, that's not what I said. I think truck traffic is to be considered, and that's why I looked at the roads, and I looked and deferred to the traffic engineers, but it appeared that it was nothing excessive compared to what could happen in this area if this site were fully developed by right.
In terms of looking at the max care analysis and the data that you were looking at regarding other plants, do you know if any of the other plants were trucking water into the facility?
The comparables that I used, I don't believe so, Council.
Do you know where the facility is proposing to get its water from?
I heard the name, it's in the area, but I don't recall the specifics. If I heard the name, I could respond.
Do you know how much water storage capacity the facility will have on site?
It's in my report, and I believe it is 800,000 gallons.
What about fuel storage facility on site?
I believe it's 1 million gallons.
At the time you prepared your report, had the truck route for water delivery been finalized?
I don't believe so.
Now that it has been finalized, you have not amended your report.
That is correct.
Do you know when the facility might be required to burn fuel oil in an average year? Would it be winter, summer, do you know?
My understanding is it's really predicated on the availability of natural gas, and the residential needs come first. And generally, my understanding, it would probably be in severe weather conditions into winter. That doesn't necessarily preclude that it could be in other times of the year.
Do you know how many days in an average year the facility will burn fuel oil? Do you know what those estimates are?
I've heard the days, I didn't memorize them. The number in relation to the whole percentage of the year is not significant. And it's actually, from my understanding, kind of a last choice use of fuel.
All right. Are you aware that the original traffic impact study in May of 2016 estimated 360 oil truck deliveries per year?
For approximately 1 per day, that's about right.
Well, there will be more oil truck deliveries when the plant is required to run on fuel oil, correct?
It depends on the amount of fuel oil that's needed. So if there's a peak period of multiple days in a row, clearly there will be more trucks in. But if there's small needs for oil, it can be spread out. Again, I would defer to the traffic engineers to give you probably a more scientific answer to that question.
You're also aware that with regard to water, there will be a significantly increased need for trucked-in water during the time it's burning fuel oil. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And as a result, there'll be many more water trucks traveling in during the fuel oil period, correct?
Correct. But again, spread out depending on peak usage.
I did not see that you took this into account in your report, the fact that we've got this revised information for the water plant. And again, is it because you felt that that simply wasn't going to modify your conclusions?
simple answer is yes, but I did consider the issues in relation to the consistency of the traffic and the potential impact on the community. But again, I defer to the traffic engineers to back up my conclusions there. But if it was a problem, then I would reconsider and would revise my report.
In the revised traffic analysis, are you aware that it states, quote, after the occurrence of an oil firing event, there will be approximately 22 trucks per day expected to access the site, quote? Does that surprise you at all?
Again, depends on the usage, but the answer is it doesn't surprise me.
And 22 trips accessing the site means 44 total trips per day, 22 in and 22 out, correct?
Correct.
Now, would you agree with me that during the operations period, this is after construction is completed, when there is an oil firing event, the amount of truck traffic would be generally it would approximately be the same as during the construction period?
The construction period is at the max a 2-year period. The oil firing event could be an hourly or daily situation. So it's possible on an occasional day or two there could be consistent traffic, but it's a significantly different comparison to something that may go on for a couple of years. So it's the exception rather than the rule.
Agreeing that it would be for a shorter period of time. I understand that. But during that period of time, although it might be and will be much shorter than the construction period, the traffic will be roughly approximately the same.
For possibly a day here and there, I would agree with you, but that's not necessarily something that would impact value. It's just kind of like the bad weather a day or two here and there. We can only adapt, unfortunately.
Okay. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to start walking through your testimony itself. I assume you have that up there with you.
I do.
And I'm going to start with page 2. And down at the bottom, starting with line 15, you talk about your experience providing testimony. And then I also took a look at your experience as outlined in your CV. And would you agree with me that you've been retained by over 60 law firms to provide expert testimony? Approximately. I mean, I counted.
No, it's probably, unfortunately, an excess because a lot of the work done for law firms was more on a consulting basis, but clearly at least half or more than that would be correct.
And you've been retained by approximately 20 financial institutions?
Easily, yes.
And over 60 public entities?
Easily, yes.
Now, on lines 21 through 23, again, we're still on page 2, you talk about testimony you previously provided, and that includes testimony with regard to energy plans, correct?
Yes.
Have you previously provided testimony for Invenergy or an Invenergy-related company?
Yes.
How many times have you done that?
4 or 5.
Could you tell us what they are?
Sure. A proposed natural gas to electric power plant in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania, pre-filed but not oral testimony in a proposed and constructed power plant in Jessup, Pennsylvania, a proposed wind farm in Freeport, Minnesota, a proposed wind farm in Palo Alto, Iowa, and a proposed wind farm in the Pontiac area of Illinois.
Thank you. Have you ever provided expert testimony in opposition to a proposed gas plant?
Gas to electric testimony, I don't believe so.
Have you ever looked at the anticipated effect on property values of a proposed gas to electric plant and concluded that there were negative impacts?
Yes,
Okay, where was that?
that was the proposed, I believe it's called Oakwood Power Plant a few years ago outside of Crystal Lake, Illinois. Because of numerous reasons I had concern with the proposed development, and my opinions were that there would be an adverse opinion on value.
An adverse effect on them.
Yes,
And to what board, court, agency were you presenting that opinion?
it would have, I believe, gone to a county board, but it never got that point that the applicant withdrew their application.
Okay, so you didn't actually testify live. Did you file pre-filed written testimony?
I did that.
So what testimony did you present?
I provided opinions, but I never provided testimony, live testimony in regards to that development.
Then I misunderstood. So you provided an opinion, or was that an energy development, or was that a different development?
Different developer out of Wisconsin.
All right. So you provided that opinion to the developer,
Correct.
and the developer withdrew the application.
Yes.
And can you tell me what the main reasons were for your opinion that there would be a negative effect on property values?
Sure. Basically, stacks of about 350 feet. Number one, a plant size of about 9 acres. Number two, relatively proximate, 800 or 900 feet from relatively, affluent residential development. A value impact contribution that was not what I would say significant to the community. No agreement on real estate taxes. So the positive impact was not clear, and the other issues, in my opinion, were not positive. On the positive end, though, it was sitting right kind of in the middle of the substation. So there was that trend of development, but the other issues, in my opinion, were of significant concern.
Okay, thank you. On page 3, pages 22, line 22 through 24, you talk about the fact that the facility will be shielded from nearby residential areas by dense woods and rolling topography. Do you see that?
I do.
You would agree with me, though, that the stacks will be visible to a number of property owners there.
Not really, and I looked, I drove the site and I went to various spots. I also looked at photometrics. I also looked at those views that were provided in the Walker report. You can see the top of the stacks. So specifically, yes, but generally, they are really not visible because they basically are blended into the woods.
All right, so you believe you can see the stacks, but it's no big deal? Is that fair?
Well, I think it's a matter of personal perception, but I think in relation to other visual observations, whether it be power lines or industrial facilities or schools, these are fairly well blocked. TV antennas and actually cell tower antennas, which is part of the normal rural urban fabric of our society.
And you don't think they have any negative impact on property values?
Not the way these are with the setbacks and the heavy wooded setting, I did that.
On page 4, on line 3, you talk about the proposed facility using state-of-the-art technology that will result in, quote, extremely low emissions. Do you see that?
I do.
And right now, on the acreage that is designated for this plant, there are no emissions except trees giving off oxygen. Would you agree with that?
I would agree under existing conditions, but again, by right, whether it be residential uses or even a more intense use as a hospital, you clearly would have emissions. We can't assume that something would never be built there.
All right. But did you look at the actual emissions that will be generated by the facility?
I reviewed the report, but I am not an environmental scientist, so I really defer to them and can't really state that. My understanding is it is state-of-the-art and basically will have reduced emissions. We probably can't go much farther than that.
All right, well, I'm going to give you some of the information, so I'll allow you to check it if you'd like, but subject to check, the reports indicate that the facility would produce 7.2 billion pounds of carbon dioxide per year, 546,000 pounds of nitrogen oxide per year, 446,000 pounds of carbon monoxide per year, 310,000 pounds of particulate matter per year, 104,000 pounds of sulfur dioxide, and 156,000 pounds per year of volatile organic compounds per year. You feel that those emissions are extremely low?
Sounds like a loaded question.
Well, it is, because I think, let me back up. Let me open the door so you can walk through it if you'd like. Would you agree with me that that you're not an expert on emissions and that your testimony that these are extremely low emissions is not expert testimony based on any specific knowledge you have?
That's correct.
Walk right through, could you?
I'm not going to avoid your questions.
No, and I appreciate that very much.
I'm not going to, elaborate on areas where that's not my expertise. I'll refer to the experts that are involved. They'll provide their support to the commission.
Would you agree with me that the perception in the community, an educated community that is aware of these numbers that I just read to you, might have a negative impact on property values?
Such as large yellow signs in the neighborhoods, probably one of the worst things that an area can do to promote property values. Perception is an issue, there's no question about it, but then the true test is the development and study of past and similar situations and make a conclusion. And during the development period is usually the time of highest risk for value impact, but once it goes forward and completed and done properly, those issues generally are totally mitigated and it actually goes the other way.
Same page, beginning at the end of line 3, and continuing on to the next line, you state that there are significant financial benefits to the local economy and to the local taxing bodies from development of the proposed power plant, including the creation of well-paid jobs in the area, which will benefit overall market demand. Did I read that correctly?
You did.
And were you here for the testimony that was given earlier today about employment benefits?
And last week, yes.
Yes. And do you recall the analysis that we went through that demonstrated that the Rhode Island benefit is approximately 32% of the total benefit?
I heard a lot of different percentages, as high as 85% from the local union expert last week. The numbers seemed to slide in a range. There seemed to be differences of opinion, and so that's probably my best answer.
Were you listening when Dr. Vader was here and we walked through the chart and we took the total impact to the Rhode Island and the surrounding communities, and then we compared it to the total impact to Rhode Island and determined that Rhode Island's was 32%?
Again, I think that was a little unclear based on some of his answers as to a specific percentage, and that conflicted with testimony of last week. Actually, there were two different groups that spoke last week, so they all basically said there was significant benefit, but the dollar amount, the percentages were subject to change.
On page 4, beginning on line 6, you talked about an analysis of residential sales proximate to existing power plants, and then you said it did not support any finding that proximity to a power plant had a negative impact on property values. Do you see that?
Based on the proposed project, correct.
Do you know if the analysis of the residential sales proximate to existing power plants dealt with power plants that were trucking water in each and every day?
As I believe I stated earlier, I don't think any of them were.
Do you know if any or all of them were dual fuel plants that could also run on oil?
Most were singular fuel observation.
Now, the same page, which is 4, beginning on line 8, you interviewed real estate brokers regarding the possible negative impact of power plants, and you stated that none of the real estate brokers interviewed believed that proximity to a power plant adversely affected the value of the residential properties with which they were involved. Is that correct? Correct. But is it also correct that you did not interview any Rhode Island real estate brokers?
That I could report or discuss in my testimony because of the controversy of the project and their concerns about upsetting the local community one way or the other.
So the answer is no, you didn't have any Rhode Island real estate broker interviews, correct?
That I can state that's correct.
Would you agree with me that I'm going to carefully choose my words. I'm not going to talk about the negative impact on property values. I just want to talk about negative impacts or negative issues associated with having large trucks running through a neighborhood. Would you agree with me that a negative of having a large truck running in front of your home is the noise?
If you're on a state route, that's to be determined, but yes, trucks cause noise, so do cars, so do children.
Would you agree with me that a negative of having large trucks run in front of your home is ground pollution from the diesel fuels?
Really, the same answer with cars and smaller trucks, but again, on a state route, it's a common occurrence.
Would you agree with me that the increased danger and severity of possible accidents with the large trucks, especially in the winter time, is a concern?
So again, that's a question for the traffic consultants, but valuing real estate, obviously safety is an observed concern, and that is a concern of the community. But to have zero traffic, you would have nobody living there, you'd have no jobs, you'd have nothing else, and again, you wouldn't get your Amazon packages. So I think we have to look at the practical implications, particularly on a state route in the modern economy.
On page 5, you're talking about your review of the tax assessor's advisory opinion, correct?
I did.
And on page 6, you expressed your opinion regarding the tax assessor's advisory opinion, and the first sentence says, quote, "The report was well-researched and well-documented," correct?
Correct.
And at the very end, on line 13, you say, "Overall, I agree with the conclusions of the report," correct?
Yes, this is on my page 5, just so the record's straight.
Correct, it is.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do is direct you, do you have that report with you?
I do.
In the executive summary on page 3, the final bullet. And I'm going to make it easier.
I have it here, so there's,
As soon as you get it, let me know. I'm also going to read it into the record.
I have it, so what page?
It's page 3,
Page 3. Got it.
on the final bullet. And it states, "There is one set of properties that are likely to be negatively impacted on a temporary basis. These are the residential properties directly across the street from the proposed facility's entrance. During the construction phase, it is likely that the properties along Route 100 directly across from the entrance will experience lower marketability and potential negative impact to market value. This impact is not anticipated to be permanent, but only during the construction phase. The exact impact to each specific property is considered to be beyond the scope of this report." Did I read that correctly?
You did.
Do you agree with that?
Parts of it, not the entire paragraph.
Oh, but it's his testimony.
Could you tell us which parts you agree with and which parts you disagree with?
This impact is not anticipated to be permanent, but only during the construction phase. In my opinion, I don't agree with the construction phase for several reasons that I can elaborate if you would like.
No, you can go ahead and list the areas of agreement and disagreement first, if you don't mind.
The third sentence, during the construction phase, it is likely that the properties along Route 100 directly across from the entrance will experience lower marketability and potential negative impact to market value. In my opinion, it's possible there could be lower marketability because some people might object, but overall, I don't think there'll be a negative impact on value, which means potentially the pool of buyers could go down, but there still will be a strong market, in my opinion, assuming, you know, a modern functional facility consistent with those in the area.
All right? So you disagree with that sentence?
In its entirety, but I agree with parts of it.
Other areas in that bullet point of agreement or disagreement?
I think the last sentence I would highly agree with. The exact impact to each specific property is considered to be beyond the scope of this report. He didn't study it. He didn't provide that analysis.
Okay, you responded on behalf of Invenergy to a data request. You don't have to have it in front of you. It's just one sentence, 2 sentences, I'm sorry. I'm going to read them to you. It's data response 14-1, the town's 14th set of data requests. And it indicates that you prepared the answer on August 18, 2016. I'm just going to read you these 2 sentences, okay?
Sure.
It says, Marusa and Company has undertaken objective analysis in all assignments as required by USPAC. We have been unable to find any instances where a paired sales analysis supports a finding that a natural gas-fired plant has had a negative impact on property values. Is that correct?
Yes.
How does that square with the fact that earlier this morning we were testifying about the opinion you gave to a proposed developer that there would be a negative impact?
Because that plant was never developed for the very reasons of my concern. And to be clear, I'm sure there's probably some older obsolete, high pollution plants in existence, probably pre-1990, that are not a positive to a community. You know, where best practices haven't been followed and there's other issues, but that's not the subject and topic of my analysis here.
Now, in your report, do you have your report itself in front of you, the August 29, 2016 report?
I will flip to it. I do.
So on page 12, if you could take a look, you're talking about your maxed pair analysis. And you were starting off talking about the maxed pairs that you looked at near the Spectra Energy compressor station in Barber.
Correct.
And you state there that the compressor, in the third line, that the compressor station generates 50 to 51 dBA during full load operation, correct?
Yes.
Are you aware of the changes that have occurred in recent months where a number of the engines in the compressor station have been upgraded, and are you aware that the compressor station generates significantly less noise currently?
It's really two questions.
I'm sorry.
I'm aware that there were plans to modernize the facility, which happens generally with a good quality facility, that potentially might have reduced the noise levels, but I'm not aware of any of the specifics of what was done.
That's fair enough. On page 19, you started analyzing the max pairs near the PEI power plant in Archbold, Pennsylvania, correct?
Yes.
And that's a 92.9 megawatt facility.
Yes.
The proposed correct facility is approximately 1,000 megawatts, correct?
Correct.
On page 25, you looked at other max pairs. They were in eastern Pennsylvania. The first was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The second was in Berks County, Pennsylvania, correct?
Yes.
Now, on page 26, your conclusion, first sentence, based on this analysis of the market, it is my opinion that the approval of the proposed power plant will not cause substantial injury to the value of other property, either in the neighborhood where it is to be located or to residential properties in the general facility. Did I read that correctly?
You did.
By substantial injury, can I assume that you understand there could be some injury, but you don't believe it's substantial?
I think that's wordsmithing, in my opinion. There will not be injury that can be quantified.
Well, that's not what you said. You said it wouldn't be substantial.
But I'm answering your question as to the quantification of the word substantial.
Do you believe there will be any injury, insubstantial?
In my opinion, no, but again, that goes to a point that probably is very difficult to quantify, and I don't want to be unrealistic.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Another question?
Just brief redirect, if I may, Madam Chair.
Let's see if we're done with the questioning.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do we-
Okay, say good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
in your report, when you talk about the highest and best use analysis on page 10, I believe you're referencing the property that's proposed for the power plant.
Yes.
Do environmental or ecosystem values factor in at all to a highest and best use analysis?
There's 4 levels, and that would be under the physically possible. So the first is legal, the second is physically possible, then it becomes financially feasible, and the fourth is the highest economic return. So under physically possible, it would have to do with the shape, the ground conditions, the availability of utilities, and other issues that could fall under.
So, in my day job, I'm the director of the Department of Environmental Management. And is it fair to say, though, so I understand your answer, that really, when you're looking at highest and best use, you're not looking at ecosystem functional values as a...
Not as a normal course, but we're looking at open lands or wetlands or floodplain issues or view amenities or destruction of those ecosystems. You look at it, but again, I would defer basically to a scientist to provide me with those support answers as to would it impact value.
Then, just looking at your CV, it looks like you had 8 years of civic duty in Park Ridge, Illinois.
I did.
Did you have a proposal like this or an application for a power plant during that time?
So that's 2 questions. So during my term, we actually had several major infrastructure. We needed a new water facility, which was a 10 to 15 million gallon facility, which we basically had to rebuild and find a spot by the piping and the lack of disruption, and that brought on a $120 million mixed-use project that was part of it. It was highly controversial. We had underground parking, we had surface modern retail such as Trader Joe's and other service, and then we had a multiplicity of loft, luxury residential townhouse type development. So we had this impact, and we also had a train station. So it kind of went from infrastructure to water to utilities to road traffic, and that was all under my watch. So yes, but not a power plant.
Yes, okay. I think you answered this already. I was looking at your rebuttal testimony, page 3, lines 10 through 13. And basically you testified you don't agree. Let me get there. Basically, you testified that you don't agree with the Davis conclusions about the reduction in values for properties that are proximate to a power plant.
Absolutely not. I don't disagree. The Davis study, in my opinion, for a variety of reasons, is flawed.
So, in regard to Mr. Harris's testimony that you saw, his perception that the plant will have a negative impact on his wooded property abutting the plant is clear, but you disagree with his conclusion.
I understand a little bit his residential, kind of commercial type project. You had a question, and that's a whole other level of conflict or risk, and basically it's running a business, and that will, if you do have or if you do have a question, you're going to have a lot of trucks in that use alone. You got all kinds of issues, but my conclusion is I do disagree with it.
Are you familiar with the property value guarantee agreement that was submitted by the town?
Generally, I am, yes.
Does that seem given that you've testified on 4 or 5 of these, does that seem in keeping the norms or best practices? Or could you comment on whether you think?
Sure, I can comment. The topic comes up a lot. It's never been implemented in any of the projects because it's so complex and difficult to monitor. Because usually, for a variety of reasons, number one, it's usually done based on a base value as of the date of implementation. And then you get into a situation of how do you administer, so you basically have to have an appraisal firm that does it year 1. Is that firm even going to be around in year 5? Then how do you ferret out the increases in value? Since I worked on this project, the data from 05 to the data today, the range markets increased about 9% a year. So that would kind of knock out the practicality of the loan. Then you get to these situations of conditional issues where the roof isn't maintained, the kitchen and baths aren't modernized. So you get into a lot of subjective and cost basis. This one appears to be well thought out and well written. It seems to cover the issue. In my opinion, it's not going to be in effect, but it does provide another level of protection. So it's about as fair as they can be, but I've never seen a perfect one. And I've seen quite a few, but they go to the stage and then they decide it's not practical, they back away from it.
Okay, so it's sort of a backstop, but rarely, or it sounds like never in your experience, put into effect.
Correct.
And why? Oh, go ahead.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but mainly sometimes there is kind of an opt-out where there's some payment made, and most of the parties end up taking that position. And sometimes, that alone can be considered a negative to the market.
Yes, this one has an opt-out.
It does.
Payment, yes. So I think the things that feel discordant is if there's no reduction in the value, why do we need the property value guarantee? But I guess it's a question.
Well, the question is, if it was a perfect world, and I think we heard from council, it's not necessarily a black and white conclusion. The administration of it is very difficult. But this situation, because there is concern, particularly with those most proximate, it seems to do the trick, in my opinion, though, again, based on the fact when I first started working on it until today, that market has basically exploded in value. And usually this time period, while there's the uncertainty and the gray the council had brought up, that's usually when values are most impacted. And I also looked at it just based on the Rhode Island increases, which are about 6% a year in the last year. And actually the subject market is up higher than that. So if anything, it would have been impacted during this past couple of years, and it hasn't. But again, if it provides concern or safety, I guess that's one way to implement it. But I just haven't seen it done where it's going to become an issue.
I think in your study that you had a period of 7 years that you looked at.
Yes.
Is that just a common, why 7 years?
Just where the best data was, and the reality is the residential market in almost all parts of the country was a disaster from 2008 to 2013. So we're trying to, take into consideration basically the depression in the real estate residential market during that time period. In a perfect world, the data would have been more current, but that goes to one of my concerns with Davis. His data, which weren't even comps, they were surveys, was 1990 and 2000, which goes back 28 years ago.
And I look at my notes for a few more minutes, so at the moment I don't have any more questions.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Curious about matched pair analysis and how you chose. I know that you looked at facilities, it was hard to find matched pairs that the criteria with the power plant inclusion. Curious about the location in Pennsylvania in particular and how that was chosen as part of the matched pair analysis.
It was really a secondary analysis that I had spent significant time in research when I was involved with the Lackawanna proposed plant, and actually went out to look at existing power plants and find data. That data was confirmed. I looked at the properties. That was the reason. The issues with the power plants, with trucks, with noise, with visibility, you know, are a common concern when any of them are developed. So those issues were, you know, somewhat consistent. But those weren't the best, obviously. The ones in the local area with ocean power were much, I think, more relevant to the study.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
Even after all that, just a couple of things here. Mr. Bruce, Mr. McElroy asked you some questions comparing sizes of facilities. He asked you about the fact that the Ocean State Power Plant is, I believe it's close to a quote, half the size of the one that's proposed here. And we asked you about the PEI plant in Pennsylvania that's 90 plus megawatts. Those numbers are output numbers, correct? Correct. You have to turn that back up.
Sorry, correct.
They don't define the physical size of the facility, correct?
Only on a small basis. I mean, they're only part of them. I mean, obviously, the size will have some relation to the physical plant, but it's only part of it.
And newer plants are smaller?
Per megawatt, yes.
And then secondly, Oakwood Hills, which is, I believe that's the one in Illinois, where you wrote a negative, where you provided a negative recommendation.
Yes.
What about that facility is different from this one that causes the difference in your opinion?
The size had similarity, but the equipment was not to the same level as I recall, state of the art. It was on a 9 plus or minus acre site as opposed to a 68 acre site, plus the Spectra ownership of 600 acres adjoining, and then the 2,800 acres to the south owned by Rhode Island is a totally different characteristic. And then the stacks were quite visible. They were 350 feet compared to the 200 feet of the subject, and the developer was not willing to even provide a range based on real estate taxes paid. It was actually, they were almost pre-planning to file through a lobbyist a tax reduction based on the cost of the facility as opposed to the significant amount of the subject development. So I mean, there was just a whole series of negative issues, and then it was just poorly managed in my opinion. So I mean, those were kind of the bullet points.
You said at one point, and I can't quote you because I didn't write that fast, but you said that in your experience, rather than a negative impact, ultimately when these plants become part of the norm, they actually have a negative effect, positive impact. Is that correct?
The new state-of-the-art ones properly designed, yes.
And what do you attribute that to?
It's basically a new industry. It's one of the core fabrics of our society today is infrastructure. I mean, we need it for our phones, our tablets, everything we do, and not having infrastructure is a huge issue. And so this provides modern infrastructure, it provides significant construction jobs, and it provides annual payments of over $5 million per year, which goes to the community, and the infrastructure provides plus or minus 25 jobs. it's just another good business. And economics, whether we look at San Francisco, or we look at New York, or we even look at Chicago, where there's positive economic growth and job creation, that's where the trend of development is. Obviously, Rhode Island is a very desirable area, but again, we all have to modernize, and positive economics are a huge factor.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's after 12:15 now, and the next matter and witness are the advisory opinion on the variable town tax assessor with testimony from Mr. Walker. Should we wait and do that after the lunch break?
He's the last one. Yeah, he's our last one, Madam Chair. I think that probably suffices.
Okay. Then we will now break for lunch. Or no?